Okay, so today we are going to be talking a little bit about the historical timeline of English language learners and the laws and the Supreme Court cases and the federal court cases that have shaped how they are able to learn and the restrictions that have been placed on them and the restrictions that have also been taken away over time. So the first thing that we're going to look at is, hold on. All right, so the first thing we're going to look at is the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So this created Title 7, Title 6. And so basically what that is that it ensures that no one may be discriminated against regardless of how they look, where they're from, or what language they speak. So this was created in 1964, which was the era of, the civil rights. A lot of that movement was going on. And so this is where we're starting out. This is the earliest one going in chronological order. And this is kind of a blanket statement, if you will. This is whenever civil rights were first being created, first being championed. So this is a broad, you know, law that was created. And as we proceed down the timeline, you're going to see how it gets a bit more narrow and a bit more specified. But this is the, if you will, blanket statement that ensures that no one may be discriminated against, where they're from, how they look, what they speak. So anyway, now we're going to jump to 1971, and this is a court case. It's United States of America versus the state of Texas, and this was in 1971. And so this is obviously after desegregation. However, as it's known, just because desegregation or segregation came to an end doesn't mean that schools and people were trying to find ways around that. So this court case was federal, and it investigated whether the San Felipe and Del Rio school districts within Texas were in fact providing equal education to all students, especially that of Mexican American students. And what the court found was that they in fact were not. And so the judge ordered the consolidation, which means they created both, like there were the two school districts obviously, and they consolidated them into one. And in order to keep an eye on them. And then that also created the court order civil action 5281, which prohibits discrimination in terms of race, color, national origin in all public and charter schools in Texas, which was interesting that it's also charter schools. And then we have Law versus Nichols. And this was in 1974, and this was a Supreme Court case. So this was national standard, not just state theater. So anyway, this was filed by Chinese parents living in San Francisco, and they felt that the education being provided was not equal. And so it led to the ruling that identical education is not equal education, according to Title VI and the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which is what we first started with. And so it says that schools cannot ignore the needs of bilingual students. And so it also established that the Office of Civil Rights can establish regulations pertaining to Title VI. All right, and then moving on, we have Serna versus Portales, and this was in 1974. So the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals discovered that students with Hispanic last names had far lower achievement levels than students with Anglo last names. And so this was obviously something to be concerned about because we're just out of the civil rights movement, and like I said earlier, people are trying to find loopholes with segregation. So to see that Hispanic students are having lower achievement rates is very concerning. So the court ordered Portales municipal schools, sorry, I always have trouble with that word, to create bilingual curriculum, as well as revising procedures to help bilingual students achieve success, and the hiring of bilingual school personnel, which before was non-existent. Okay, and then the next one that we have is Cintron versus Brentwood. So this was in 1978, and the Federal District Court for the Eastern District of New York did not recognize the proposed bilingual program of Brentwood School District. And the reason that they didn't was because there was an unnecessary segregation of Spanish-speaking students. It wasn't constructive to the students. There is a point where, if you speak a different language, you do need to be in a different classroom. However, they did not give them the ability to exit that classroom and go into the classroom where English was primarily spoken. So this was a violation of civil rights, obviously, because they were hiding under the front that they were helping these students with their language when in fact they were bilingual and they wouldn't let them go into English speaking classrooms. Okay, and now we have Rios versus Reed. And this is another federal case, and this happened in 1978. So, the Federal District Court for the Eastern District of New York found a fraudulent transition bilingual program in the Pascagoula, I'm really sorry, I keep butchering this word, I've tried so many times, Medford School District. So, this is another similar instance where there was a facade of bilingual education that wasn't actually happening. So students were not being provided an opportunity of equal education by receiving instruction in English instead of Spanish. So kind of opposite to what we just heard in this past case, where they were only receiving instruction in Spanish and not being allowed to transition into English. These students were only receiving education and instruction in English, and they were using the very old tactics of 20s to about the 60s of the sink or swim, which is no longer in use for obvious reasons. And so they believed that they needed to receive education in English and learn it in English and get done with it. But obviously, that's not how that works. And so the federal court found that out and put an end to that, thankfully, for the students. Okay, and then the next case we're going to talk about is Castañeda versus Pickard. Okay, so this one is super important and kind of surprisingly, at least in my eyes, maybe that's not a surprise to everyone, but it's just a federal court case, but it's a very, very big one. So it happened in 1981. As I said before, it's arguably one of the most important court decisions regarding English language learners. So claims were being made that Raymondville, Texas Independent School District's language transition programs violated the EEOA. And so, anyway, the court, excuse me, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals found that that was true. They were not being taught in the way that they should. So in order to create an environment where this is less likely to happen and to create rules and regulations that are clearer and more precise for educators to follow and less likely to have loopholes, they created up with the Castañeda test. And so the first one is theory. The school must pursue a program based on educational theory recognized as sound or at least as a legitimate experimental strategy. The second one is practice. The school must actually implement the program with instructional practices, resources, and personnel necessary to transfer theory to reality. And number 3, results. The school must not persist in a program that fails to produce results. Okay, and now we have Plyer versus Doe, and this is a Supreme Court case that happened in 1982. So it was kind of a little argument that because certain children were undocumented immigrants, that they did not have a right to public education within the United States. However, the Supreme Court reviewed this claim and they found that that was unconstitutional, and they found that due to the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, that no states have the right to deny public education to children who are undocumented immigrants. Okay, and then we have Keyes versus School District Number 1, and this is in 1983. Okay, so the U.S. District Court realized that a Denver public school was not meeting the second standard of the Castañeda test, which was created 2 years prior. So this was obviously something they needed to take care of, and they corrected that school. And then we have Gomez versus Illinois, which happened in 1987. And the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals ruled state education agencies are required by Equal Education Opportunities Act of 1974 to make sure that English language learners' educational needs are met. And then I have my Works Cited page right here, which was a very, very helpful article. And this is where I got all my information from, as well as the texts that I've read previously. But this is where I got the majority of my, well, actually all of my information pertaining to this particular project.